So let your mind settle down and be right here in the present place, wherever you are, the present moment, right now. If there are any thoughts in your mind left over from what you did earlier today or any time in the past, let go of those, put those aside. Do the same with any thoughts about plans that you have for later today or tomorrow, next week, and so forth. So try to have a really clear, open, spacious mind, ready to engage in this course. And so, what we're going to be doing here is learning about the mind. And this is a very important topic in Buddhism. The Buddha discovered that our mind is the source of both happiness, good experiences, peace, and so forth, and also suffering, problems, difficulties. So, all the good and bad things that happen in our own lives and also in the world, they all have their source in our mind. And if we don't understand this, we sometimes unknowingly create the causes of suffering, even though we don't want to suffer. And although we want happiness and good experiences, we avoid creating the causes for those because of not knowing how. So, learning about the mind and learning about the causes of happiness and the causes of suffering within our mind is very crucial if we do want to be happy and avoid suffering. And it's best if we engage in this study of the mind with an altruistic motivation, wanting to better help other people and other beings and avoid causing them suffering. So, if that sounds like something you would like to do, then bring into your mind, into your heart, the motivation to listen to these talks and learn something from them that will not only help you to work on your mind, but also to be better able to help others. So, this weekend is actually the third in a series of weekend courses that we've been having on the mind. And so the first one was in June, and in that we looked at the mind in general. What is the mind, and like its qualities, its characteristics. And we also looked at 7 specific states of mind, types of mind or awareness that are very important in Buddhist practice to be able to follow the path to enlightenment, to liberation, and so on. And then in the second course, back in August, we looked at another way of dividing up the mind, because when we say mind in Buddhism, even though we usually use the singular mind and it sounds like we have just one mind, but in reality, our mind is constantly changing. It's something changing moment by moment. And so each moment there's a new state of mind arising, and then that passes, and then the next one arises, and that passes, and so on. And so, strictly speaking, it's better to say minds in plural because we have actually many minds, many different mental states. And so, yeah, and these different mental states are divided up in different ways in Buddhist philosophy. So, one way of dividing the minds is into two divisions. main minds, also known as primary minds, and mental factors. And so that's what we started looking at in the last course in August. And we started looking at some of the mental factors. Um, there's actually many mental factors, but in our tradition, we mainly study 51 different mental factors. And so in the last course, we looked at some of the mental factors, groups, um, some that are called omnipresent or ever present because they're there every single moment. Others are called object ascertaining, which are more present when we are thinking and analyzing, trying to understand things. And then a group of virtuous mental factors. So there's 11 virtuous, positive, constructive mental factors, such as faith and non-harmfulness, i.e. compassion, and non-hatred, i.e. love, and so on. So if you missed those previous courses, you can find the videos online. I'll just start with a brief overview of some of the main points from those previous courses for those of you who might be new to this topic of mind and the different types of mind. So according to Buddhism, we say mind or consciousness is another term. So those two are interchangeable, mind and consciousness. What we are talking about here is something non-material, non-physical. So it isn't made of molecules, atoms, and so forth, material particles. It's totally non-material. And it's that part of us that experiences things. Okay, so it's actually present all the time, never stops, never takes a break. So all day long, we're having different experiences. Some of these experiences are perceptual, meaning we have 5 physical senses: seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and the sense of touch, feeling sensations in our body. So those experiences are mind, part of our mind. We also have a 6th sense, which is called a mental consciousness in Buddhism. And that consists of our thoughts, our memories, our emotions, our dreams. Yeah, so that's, I don't know about you, but for me, that's a very busy, active part of my experience. Even when we're asleep at night, mine doesn't stop when we go to sleep. Keeps going. And so when we have dreams, it's our mind that is dreaming, and it's this 6th consciousness, the mental consciousness, because our 5 senses shut down. They're not operating when we're asleep, but our 6th sense is still there, and that's what comes up with all these wild dreams that we have. And even in a state of dreamless sleep, according to Buddhism, mind is still there, still active, still experiencing something, even if it's just darkness, dark voidness. It never stops. It's always there, always present, always experiencing things. And as I mentioned before, it's impermanent, meaning that it changes all the time, every tiny instant of time. And the meaning of change is, an experience, a moment of mind will arise, and then immediately it's gone. The next moment arises and it's gone. And it's happening so fast. This change is happening so fast. It looks as if it's a kind of solid continuum. But in fact, and for us it's difficult to experience this, but for people who've developed their minds to a high degree, they are able to see every single moment of mind arising and passing. So they can confirm what the Buddha said about that. So as I say, we actually have multiple minds rather than just one mind. It's like a flow. I like to think of a stream or a river. It's flowing and constantly changing. rather than kind of a lump somewhere inside of us, one solid thing that's always the same. So that's just a brief introduction to what mind is. And then each of these individual moments of mind or mental states or experiences um, can be dissected further into components, because each moment of mind is actually kind of a cluster of different components. Okay, so that's how we get into this topic of main minds and mental factors. So within that cluster of an individual moment of mind, there's always one main mind or primary mind. So there's one of those, only one at a time. And that main mind could be one of 6 types, either one of the 5 sense experiences, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, or the 6th sense, the mental consciousness. So one of those 6 is always present every moment with every experience that we have. And then in addition to that main mind, there are a number of mental factors. So mental factors are also mind. They are of the same nature of mind, this non-material um, phenomena that knows, that experiences. And like I say, there's many different mental factors, but we mainly study 51 in our tradition. Other traditions, like in the Pali tradition, I think they have 49. It's pretty similar. But there's actually many, many mental factors that we don't really study because they're, I don't know, they're not considered so important. But there's, anyway, many mental factors. The 51 are mainly important. And so of these 51 mental factors, there's one group called ever present or omnipresent, because they are present every single moment with every single experience we have. One of those is feeling. And feeling is a mental factor that experiences its object. There's always an object. That's another thing. Whenever we have a moment of mind, it always has an object. There's always something that is being seen or heard or smelled or tasted or felt or thought about, experienced with the mental consciousness. There's always an object. And so feeling, one of the ever-present mental factors, experiences the object as either pleasant or unpleasant or neither. There's only 3 types of feelings: pleasant feeling, unpleasant feeling, and neutral, neither pleasant nor unpleasant. So that's every single moment. Every time we see something or hear something or smell or taste or feel something in our body or have a thought or a memory, there's always a feeling tone to it. It feels pleasant, it feels unpleasant, it feels neutral. This is one thing the Buddha recommended that we become aware of, that we become mindful of, because if we're not careful, a pleasant feeling can lead to attachment. For most ordinary beings, that's what happens. You encounter a pleasant object, and in the next moment or a few moments later, I want it, wanting to hold on to it, wanting to grasp onto it, and that can get us into trouble. Or when we have an unpleasant feeling, when we experience the object as unpleasant, then we usually feel aversion, and that can grow into anger, hatred, and even some kind of aggressiveness, violence, wanting to destroy it. And that can happen pretty quickly. Like, for example, with certain types of insects, when people see a certain type of insect they don't like, immediately, poof, yeah, so fast. We don't do that here. But many people do. Okay, so you can see how quickly, you see an object, you regard it as something unpleasant, an enemy, bad, poof, kill it. So you can create bad karma so quickly. You can also create good karma very quickly. Like we train ourselves to have devotion to the Buddha. So um, when we have statues and tankas, pictures of Buddhas all around. And so when we see an image of the Buddha, immediately you can have a feeling of faith and joy and put your hands together, feel happy. So just in a moment, you can feel something positive, faith, and then create good karma. So, anyway, that's just one illustration of a mental factor, feeling, which is ever present. So, I'm not going to go through those again. That was last time. But just to talk about the different functions of a main mind and the mental factors. Okay, so again, each moment, each instance of experience consists of a cluster, one main mind plus at least five mental factors, because there are five omnipresent, ever-present mental factors that are there every moment with every moment of mind. But there may be other mental factors as well. So the functions of these different aspects of the mind, the main mind is simply aware of the general presence or the general existence of an object. So when we see an image of the Buddha, the main mind is just seeing the overall object itself. And then the mental factors, each mental factor has their own individual portfolio, you might say, their own job. They apprehend the object in different ways, like feeling, for example. So, what feeling does, the job of feeling is to experience the object as pleasant or unpleasant or neither, neutral. Like I think of when we look at a wall, a very plain white wall, we probably just have a neutral feeling, unless you really like that wall or you really hate that wall. But yeah, so there's certain objects we don't really like, we don't really hate, we don't feel good, we don't feel bad, just kind of in between. So anyway, so each mental factor has its own job to do, its own way of dealing with the object. So that's just roughly the difference between main minds and mental factors. Also, another thing about minds and mental factors, the main minds themselves, like seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and thinking, they are neutral. They're neither virtuous nor non virtuous. Okay, so when we see or hear or whatever, think about an object, the main mind on its own, by itself, is neutral. But some mental factors, and some of the mental factors are also neutral. They're neither virtuous nor non-virtuous on their own. But there are some mental factors that are virtuous or non-virtuous. So like last time we were looking at the virtuous mental factors. Faith is the first on the list. And so that is by nature virtuous. Its nature is to be virtuous. So whenever faith arises, then the whole mind actually becomes virtuous, because if one of the mental factors in the cluster is virtuous, all the rest become virtuous too. So the whole mind, that particular moment of experience, the whole thing becomes virtuous. But there's also some mental factors that are non-virtuous, and they have the same effect. If one, like for example, anger is non-virtuous. So if when an anger arises, if that particular mental factor arises in the mind, um, then that whole instance of mind becomes non-virtuous. The whole thing becomes colored negative or non-virtuous. Okay? So the main mind and all the other mental factors in that cluster is similar, like when you have a glass of water and you put in a drop of food coloring. Yeah. Before you put the drop of food coloring in, the water is clear. But if you put in a drop of red food coloring, the whole glass of water, all the molecules become red. or yellow or green or whatever. Okay. So, in a similar way, some mental factors, virtuous and non-virtuous, will color the whole mind at that particular moment, making it virtuous or non-virtuous. So this is what we're going to look at this weekend. We're going to look at non-virtuous mental factors. Although, yeah, it's a little tricky. I'll get into that. There is a difference. They're actually called, these groups of mental factors we're looking at this weekend are called afflicted mental factors. And there's a difference between afflicted and non-virtuous. They're not synonymous, which I will explain soon. Okay, so I made a handout for this weekend's course. It should be available on the Abbey website, so I hope you have it, and if you don't, you can look for it and download it. Okay, so the first thing on the list on the handout is the 6 root afflictions. But before going into that, we'll just look at what is an affliction. General explanation of affliction. Okay, so an afflictions are distinct mental factors that, when they arise in our minds, cause our minds to be unpeaceful and unsubdued. So that's the general meaning of an affliction. It's a mental factor, and these are mental factors that are not always there in our mind. They come and go, but when they do come, they do arise in our mind. This is the function they have. This is what they do to our mind. They make our mind unpeaceful, disturbed, unsubdued, not, yeah, kind of unpleasant. If you really watch carefully, you can see that. You can see how your mind gets disturbed, unpeaceful, unhappy with afflictions. So then the next sentence says, afflictions may be emotions, attitudes, or views, and they usually arise without our choice. I mean, I don't think anybody chooses to get angry. You know, we don't wake up in the morning and say, I want to be angry today as much as I possibly can. Maybe some people do, I don't know. But I think most of us don't. We don't really choose to have these afflicted states of mind. They just pop up. And it's not that they come from nowhere. There are causes. There's always causes for things like our mind and our mental factors. So the main cause for the arisal of afflictions in our mind is a seed, a kind of seed uh, of that particular affliction that was left by previous experiences. So, because we've gotten angry many times in this life, and not just this life, but past lives and back to beginninglessness. Our mind is beginningless. And there's always been anger in our mind. So each time we get angry, it leaves a seed to get angry again. Just like a tree, trees produce seeds, they drop them on the ground, and then from those seeds arise new trees. So it's similar with what happens in our mind. So we have within our mind these seeds of anger and other afflictions left from previous experiences of those same types of afflictions. And then when the causes and conditions come together, just like in nature, springtime, it's warm, there's rain, and the seeds grow, become new trees. So, in a similar way, when we meet with the right conditions to nourish our seeds of anger, then they come up and we have anger in our mind. And then the first part of that sentence is very important. It says, afflictions may be emotions, attitudes, or views. This is a little tricky because some teachers refer to these mental states as afflictive emotions, right? We've had that recently in teachings, afflictive emotions. So that expression can be kind of misleading because it sounds like they're all emotions, but they're not. Ignorance. Is ignorance an emotion? Wrong views? Are those emotions? Actually, the word emotion is kind of tricky because it doesn't exist in Tibetan. I mean, at least, and I think my understanding is also Pali and Sanskrit. Like in the Buddhist tradition, Buddhist philosophy, they don't have a word for emotion. It's not a way that traditionally Buddhism divides up the mind. There's emotions and there's other things. They don't have that. This is a Western thing. Um, so, but on the other hand, some of these afflictions would be what we call emotions. For example, anger, okay, jealousy. So those, we would call them emotions, negative emotions, disturbing emotions. But like I say, others are anger. I mean, ignorance. Ignorance isn't really an emotion. So that's why, yeah, it's a little tricky to find a, um, a good English term for these. And even the word affliction, I'm uncomfortable with because an affliction isn't necessarily a mental state. If you look up affliction in the dictionary, it's anything that causes suffering. So a hurricane, coronavirus, these are afflictions, according to the English definition of affliction, but they're not mental states. So another way around that would be to say mental afflictions or afflictive states of mind, but then it gets very complicated. I heard one translation that I thought was really good. It was factors that disturb the mind. And I thought that's a perfect term, factors that disturb the mind. Anyway, different translators and teachers like different terms. I like the term delusion, actually. When I was first learning Buddhism, that was the word we used, and that's the word that many people still use. And for me, it's kind of short and sweet and simple and very clear because these are definitely delusions, deluded states of mind. Anyway, whatever you want to call them. But anyway, here we are talking about mental states, mental factors that disturb the mind. Some of them are emotions, but some of them are just attitudes or views. And there's two groups of these. There's the 6 root afflictions, and then 20, sometimes they're called secondary or auxiliary afflictions. We'll start with the 6 root afflictions. So it's the next paragraph says the 6 root afflictions are the primary causes of cyclic existence and are the root cause of the auxiliary afflictions. We'll get to those later. So these 6 are the main ones. They are the basis for all distorted conceptions and emotional conflict. And so all the stuff that's going on in politics, different countries, and even wars, groups of people fighting each other, killing each other, or individuals fighting with each other, hurting each other. So at the root of all these problems are these afflictions. So the 6 ones are attachment, anger, arrogance, ignorance, deluded doubt, and afflictive views. So we're going to go through these one by one and look at them. And traditionally in texts on Lorig, the term for this topic in Tibetan is Lorig, minds and mental factors. And it just kind of gives descriptions, explanations of these different mental factors, but it doesn't give solutions or antidotes. But I'm going to do that. I'm going to pull out material from other sources because I think it's just natural that, um, we want to know what to do about these. So I'll throw in some of that information. Okay, so one question, I already mentioned it, about these afflictive mental states. Are they non-virtuous or not? And alternate terms for non-virtuous are unwholesome or negative. So different teachers and translators use different terms. So we're going to start by looking at what what is the meaning of this term non-virtue. So in general, non-virtue is the cause of suffering. Non-virtue is what brings suffering, which is what we usually don't want. We want to avoid it. So the cause of suffering is non-virtue. And in the last course, we looked at 5 types of virtue. And parallel to those, there are 5 types of non-virtue. So the first one is natural non-virtue. This is the real meaning of non-virtue, the real non-virtue. These are mental factors that are by nature non-virtuous. So they include anger, jealousy, resentment. So those are some of the mental factors that are always non-virtuous because they bring suffering. Anger brings suffering, jealousy brings suffering, resentment brings suffering. And then the second type of non-virtue are related non-virtues. These are the main mind and the mental factors that accompany a naturally non-virtuous mental factor. So again, each moment of mind, each experience is a cluster of a main mind plus a number of mental factors. So they're kind of all together in a group and they can't be separated. It's impossible to have just a main mind by itself without any mental factors with it. And it's also impossible to have just a mental factor wandering around by itself without being together with a main mind. So they always come together in a package. They can't be separated. So when there's one of the naturally non-virtuous mental factors like anger, when that is there within that cluster, it kind of poisons the whole thing, like the food coloring, the drop of food coloring. Put a drop of food coloring in, the whole thing becomes colored. So that one mental factor of anger present in that mind will make the whole thing non-virtuous. So let's just take an example. Let's say there's somebody you don't like, somebody you have aversion to, and you happen to see that person walking up the street. And, well, my understanding is that the non-virtuous mental factors like anger, they don't accompany our sense consciousnesses. They only accompany the mental consciousness. So first you would see that person, and in the next moment or a few moments afterwards, when the mental consciousness kicks in, oh, there's Harry. Oh my God, I can't stand Harry. So that's the mental consciousness that identifies Harry as, and he's somebody you can't stand. So together with that mental consciousness, there will be anger, the mental factor of anger accompanying that. And so that mental consciousness, the main mind, the mental consciousness, and all the other mental factors together in the same package, they all become non-virtuous because of the presence of that non-virtuous mental factor, anger. So the whole thing becomes non-virtuous. So that's what's being talked about here, number 2. The main mind and other mental factors accompanying a naturally non-virtuous mental factor. These all become non-virtuous, um, related non-virtuous. Again, they're not non-virtues by their own nature, but they become non-virtuous because of being together with a non-virtuous mental factor. Does that make sense? Okay, number 3 is called subsequently related non-virtues. So these are latencies or seeds left on the mind by non-virtuous minds and mental factors. So after getting angry, after having anger in the mind, then a seed or latency, a seed is actually a type of latency, that's kind of planted in the mind, left in the mind. And then that, if we don't purify it, can give rise to a later experience of that same type of non-virtuous mental state. So those are also non-virtues, although they're not actual non-virtues, because, does anyone know why? They're not mind, yeah. Most schools say that to be non-virtuous, it has to be a consciousness, a mind. And latencies are not mind. They are another type of phenomena called abstract composites. So that's an impermanent phenomena that's not mind, and it's also not form or physical matter. It's a, yeah, kind of in between impermanent phenomena. So latencies are like that. They're not consciousness, but they can be left by consciousness, by mind. So that's why they're not actual non-virtues. They're ethically neutral. This is because they are abstract composites. And most Buddhist schools assert that only consciousnesses can be virtuous and non-virtuous. Then number 4, non-virtues due to motivation. So these are actions that we do, karma that we create under the motivation, under the influence of, or motivated by non-virtues. So if we see Harry and feel angry at Harry and thinking about the things that Harry's done that we don't like, then when we get close to him, we might say something insulting. You blank, blank, blank. Okay, so that kind of speech would be a non-virtuous kind of speech. It's harsh speech, one of the 10 non-virtues, motivated by anger. And so that kind of speech is this number 4, non-virtue due to motivation. Okay, so non-virtuous action. Maybe we punch Harry in the face. That's really strong. Or speak harsh words to him. And because those were motivated by a non-virtuous state of mind, they become non-virtuous as well. This is non-virtuous karma. And that's what really brings suffering. When we do something non-virtuous, then many painful results can happen, not just in the immediate sense, maybe Harry punches us back or insults us back, but long term, later on in this life and future lives and so on. We create the cause to experience suffering. Number 5 is, this is a little complicated, non-virtues by way of ultimacy or ultimate non-virtues. These are phenomena included within samsara. I mean, some say it's samsara itself. Samsara itself is ultimate non-virtue. But I took this from the text on the mental factors by Kachin Yeshi Gelsen, which I think some of you have copies of. So this is how he explains it. Phenomena included within samsara. Since these are the sources from which aryas generate despondency. They are called non-virtues by the way of ultimacy. So, what is samsara? When we say samsara, what exactly is samsara? Yeah, this collection of aggregates, body and mind, which came about as a result of ignorance and afflictive emotions. So, in past lives, we created karma under the influence of ignorance and afflictive emotions. And as a result of that, we have this body mind combination. I mean, relatively, it's good. We have a fortunate life, but it's still within samsara. It's still samsara. So it's contaminated, polluted, and afflicted by suffering. And we keep creating more and more suffering all the time. So this is samsara. So for me, this is a little puzzling when it says ultimate non-virtue is samsara. So that means our aggregates, this combination of body mind, this is ultimate non-virtue. And one thing I read was because it's suffering, because it itself is suffering. It's unsatisfactory, and it becomes the basis for further suffering. Having this body-mind combination, still under the influence of ignorance and other afflictions and karma, then we continue creating more and more suffering all the time. This is what we're trying to get out of. This is what we want to recognize as something to be free from and get ourselves free from in the path. Then it goes on to say, nonetheless, it is not definite that everything included in samsara is an actual non-virtue. Okay, so if we think about our aggregates, our body and mind, some are non-virtuous, like anger, attachment, ignorance. So some of what's included in our aggregates is non-virtuous, but not all, because we have virtuous mental factors, we have faith, we have virtuous karma. So it's kind of a mixed bag. We are a mixed bag. There's some virtue, some non-virtue. But I think the point of this is just to understand that, this is the real non-virtue, having this set of aggregates under the control of karma and delusion. And if we don't do the right things, we are just perpetuating our suffering. We're continuing to act in ways that just create more and more suffering for ourselves. And so we need to recognize this and do what we can to get out. So I hope that's not too complicated. But anyway, for me, it's very interesting to know about what exactly is non-virtue and the meaning of non-virtue. Okay, so then it goes on to say, not all afflictions are non-virtuous. This is a little complicated, but it's helpful. So some of the afflictions that we're going to come to, we haven't yet gotten to them, but some of them are not by themselves non-virtuous. So they include ignorance. So ignorance is not necessarily non-virtuous. Why? Ignorance can motivate us to create virtue. I want to be happy in my future life, so I'm going to refrain from non-virtuous actions. I'm going to keep precepts. I'm going to make offerings. I'm going to do prostrations. So we're under the influence of ignorance, but we can still do virtue. So it doesn't always lead to just suffering. The second one is view of a personal identity. We'll get to that later. This is believing in a real I, sense of a real inherently existing I. And then view of extremes. So those three are by themselves neutral. They're not necessarily non-virtuous, although they could be. And we'll learn more about these as we go on, what exactly are these three. But actually, I just found out yesterday, I was asking a question to a monk friend in India, with regard to view of extremes, that has two aspects. One is sometimes it's called permanence or eternalism or absolutism. And that's where we believe, like, I am going to live forever. There's a real soul, a real self that will continue to exist after we die. That's an example of the view of permanence. And the other one is nihilism, which is to think everything ends at death. There's an I right now, but it's going to totally go out of existence when I die. This is a very pervasive view nowadays. A lot of people believe that. Nothing continues after this life. So of those two, the first one is ethically neutral, but the second one isn't. The second one is non-virtuous. That brings suffering. Anyway, we'll get into that one later. But anyway, these particular mental factors are not non-virtuous on their own. It says they are not non-virtuous because by themselves they lack the capacity to produce pain. They cannot lead to suffering on their own. And they don't always give rise to non-virtuous mental states. As just found out, they can sometimes motivate virtuous actions, lead to happiness within samsara. But to get out of samsara, if we want to be free of samsara, we do have to overcome them. We do have to be free from them. Next paragraph says, more complications. All afflictions of the desire realm are non-virtuous, except unmixed ignorance. Ignorance, that means ignorance that does not accompany another affliction, such as anger or attachment. So ignorance, this is mainly believing in an inherently existing I, inherently existing other, inherently existing phenomena. So ignorance about the true nature of things, believing in inherent existence. Okay, so that's what we mean by ignorance. So there's a differentiation between mixed ignorance and unmixed ignorance. We went through that recently in Friday night teachings. Mixed ignorance is when ignorance is in the same mental state as a non-virtuous mental state like anger. Okay, so when we see Harry and get angry at Harry, if we also have ignorance at the same time, believing Harry to be inherently existing. Okay, so if that mental factor is present together with anger, then that does become non-virtuous by relationship because they're in the same package. So ignorance does sometimes become non-virtuous. But unmixed ignorance would be when ignorance is there in the mind and there isn't a non-virtuous mental factor. For example, if we're looking at, well, this is tricky. I'm still trying to figure this one out, but maybe just neutral. I think in samsara, nirvana, Buddha nature, the example would be looking at this and thinking it's inherently existing and not feeling angry at it or attached to it, but just kind of a neutral state of mind, but still seeing it as inherently existing. So at that moment, that ignorance isn't non-virtuous. And the same with the other two, view of personal identity and view of extremes. So those are exceptions. Those are mental factors that are in the group of afflictive mental factors, but they are not non-virtuous. So desire realm, this is where we are. This is where we abide, and everyone else in this world. So the desire realm includes the three lower realms: hell, hungry ghost, animal, the human realm, and it includes the asuras and some of the gods, some of the deva realms. 6 of the deva realms are in the desire realm. So within the desire realm, all of our afflictions, except for those 3, are non-virtuous. But then it goes on to say, all the afflictions of the upper realms, this is the form realm and the formless realms, these are Deva realms that are higher up. And in order to be born in those realms, one needs to cultivate single pointed concentration and then develop very high meditative states of mind. And as a result of that, you can be born in those realms. And in those realms, the minds of beings are much more pure, much more refined. And they still have some afflictions. They're not free of afflictions. They don't have anger. They never get angry. Imagine that. Being in a place where nobody ever gets angry. Wouldn't that be great? But they still have some other afflictions like attachment and I think pride, arrogance. Yeah, so they can still be afflicted by those, but they're more refined. For example, they don't get attached to food. They don't even eat food. They don't need food. They have bodies made of light. But they can get attached to their bliss in meditation. So it's a kind of more refined type of attachment than what we usually have. Um, so the afflictions that they have in those realms are neutral, not non-virtuous. So it says a degree of intensity is needed for an affliction to be non-virtuous and bring suffering, like bring a bad rebirth. And the afflictions of beings in the upper realms are very refined and lack the intensity required to create non virtuous karma that ripens into painful experiences. Okay, so they never do any of the 10 non virtuous actions. They never get angry, they never kill or steal or have sexual misconduct. So the 10 non virtuous actions just don't happen up there. So they just have more refined minds. They still have some attachment, they still have some pride, they still have ignorance, of course. But yeah, none of those are non virtuous. So it's a little bit complex, and it may be too complex for some of you. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that when we look at these afflictions, not all of them are non virtuous. But for us, where we are in the desire realm, most of them are. So we do need to look out for them. And just a note of warning, when we go through these afflictions, learning about these afflictions, people can sometimes feel depressed or distressed or despair, thinking, oh, I'm so bad. I have all of these afflictions in my mind. I'm bad. I'm horrible. I'm hopeless. I even read one Western woman went to Dharamsala and was attending teachings by the Dalai Lama, and he was probably teaching the Lam Rim or something. So she was sitting there every day listening to these teachings, and she said she felt, I'm the worst person in the world. In a way, that's good. She was probably recognizing that she has all these afflictions, anger and attachment and da 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 da. But I think she went too far. I'm sure she was not. She's not the worst person in the world. If we think about people like the Taliban and ISIS and serial killers and serial rapists and so on, she probably doesn't do those kind of things. But it just shows what can happen sometimes, that our mind can, take this information and run with it in an unhealthy direction and end up feeling, oh, I'm bad, I'm horrible, I'm hopeless. So be careful about that. It is good to recognize the presence of these afflictions in our mind rather than thinking, oh yeah, everybody else has those, but not me. I'm not like that. So watch out for that too. We do need to use the Dharma as a mirror, as I was saying the other day. Look at our own mind and, ask ourselves honestly if we have these or not. And if we do recognize them, that's actually a good thing. It's good to recognize what's there because then we can work on it, we can fix it up. But don't go overboard with that and end up feeling depressed and hopeless. Those thoughts are not helpful, and they're also not realistic because these afflictions are temporary, they're transitory, they are impermanent, they come and they go. They are not always there in our mind, they are not in the nature of our mind. And you've probably heard this, but I'll repeat it. And in fact, I'll read what His Holiness says about it. They can be removed. So Buddhism says the real nature of our mind is pure and clear. So this is a little book called How to Expand Love by His Holiness, and edited by Jeffrey. So there's a chapter on the basic purity of the mind. Is it possible to get rid of problematic emotions completely, or is it only possible to suppress them? According to a basic Buddhist insight, the mind is essentially luminous and knowing. Therefore, emotional problems do not reside in the mind's essence. Such counterproductive attitudes are temporary and superficial and can be removed. And then to give a reason to back that up, if distressing emotions such as anger were in the very nature of the mind, then from its inception, the mind would always have to be angry. Obviously, this is not so. Only under certain circumstances do we become angry. And when those circumstances are not present, anger is not present either. So we can check that out ourselves. If anger was in the nature of the mind, a permanent fixture in the mind, it should be there all the time. Is that true? I'm sure nobody has anger every single minute, every single second, 24/7. So we can see in our own experience, it comes and goes. It's not always there. And sometimes the opposite is there. Sometimes we have compassion and kindness and friendliness and, positive experiences that are opposite to anger. So if we see that in ourselves, in our own experience, we can see, oh yeah, anger is just temporary, not permanent. And by familiarizing ourselves with antidotes to anger, we can make it present less often. We can decrease the frequency of our anger. We can see that as well. We can see how that is possible. So then we can think, okay, if I keep working like this, if I keep making myself familiar with these antidotes to anger, I can decrease my anger more and more and more and more and more. And there is an ultimate weapon, an ultimate solution to anger, which is the wisdom realizing emptiness. So when we can generate that, it's not easy, but it is possible. And they say when we gain the direct realization of emptiness, that's like an atom bomb. Completely annihilates anger in our minds so that it will never arise again. Well, the Buddha did this, many others have done it, and they say you can do it too. So we need to remember that. Okay, so let's start looking at these 6 root afflictions. The first one is attachment. It can also be called desire and craving, grasping, clinging. Those are all different kind of forms of attachment. So what is it? It's defined as a mental factor that, based on distorted attention, that exaggerates the attractiveness of a polluted object, and that means an object under the influence of ignorance or its latencies. I mean, most of the things we deal with in our world are polluted objects. Our bodies and the bodies of others, our minds, all the material things in the world, all of these originate from ignorance and other afflictions. So they're all polluted objects. Okay, so the object of attachment is something polluted. And then attachment wishes for and takes a strong interest in it. Okay, so let's unpack that just to make it more clear. So when we encounter an object that we find attractive, usually there's the initial feeling of we have a pleasant feeling towards a certain object. It could be a person, it could be a material object, could be food or drink, or could be something more abstract, like an experience. Somebody's talking about going to the Caribbean and having a wonderful time, and you think, oh, I would love to go there and have that experience too. So, yeah, that's like an experience that one can have traveling. Or knowledge. We could also be attached to knowledge, wanting to be really smart and know a lot. Fame, respect, there's endless things we can get attached to. Okay, there's something that we find attractive and desirable. And what happens with attachment is it's not attachment itself, but it's another mental factor, which is called improper attention, or here it's called distorted attention. There's this exaggeration. Okay, so from the initial experience of interest, attraction to that object, then this other thing kicks in and exaggerates the attractiveness of the object so that it seems more wonderful, more fantastic than it probably really is. And there's also some projection. We project things. I really want certain qualities in a person, and that person looks like they might have those qualities, so let's imagine that they do. Okay, so we kind of project things onto the object, the person, or the place, or whatever, and so kind of build it up into something really wonderful, really fantastic. And then, so attachment says, I want that, thinking that that's going to bring me happiness. That's what we want, basically. We want happiness. We want to feel good. And when we encounter some object that looks like it might bring us happiness, make us feel good, fulfill our wishes and our needs, then this grasping comes up. I want it. So that's a description of attachment. So the object could be something material, a person, or a place, or it could be praise or an idea. These are just some examples of things we can get attached to. Attachment functions to produce discontent and to perpetuate the cycle of existence. So, discontent. So, the Buddha, there's a saying of the Buddha, something like, if we follow the thoughts of desire, it's like drinking salt water. We never get satisfied. We just get more and more thirsty. So you can check your experience if that's true or not. I remember as a child, you get one toy and you're happy for a few minutes, and then you see another toy that is better than the one you have, and you want that, and then another one, and then another one, and so that's the story of our life. We get one thing that we hope will bring us happiness and peace and pleasure, maybe happy for a little while, but then we see something else. And of course, the manufacturers know this very well. So they're constantly improving the iPhones and the computers and the cameras and this and that to make better ones, and cars, of course, so that you become dissatisfied with the one you have and want this new one and better one, and then they make more money. So, yeah, this is our mental state, attachment. Yeah, so yeah, it's good to keep in mind what the Buddha said. If you keep following thoughts of attachment and desire, will you ever get satisfied? Will you ever reach the point where you feel, I have enough, I'm happy, this is enough for me? And so, yeah, if we keep following attachment, then it perpetuates cycle of existence. It makes the world go round. It makes samsara go round. Okay, so one question people sometimes have is, well, what about holy objects? Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, the three jewels. Can we get attached to those? Possible. However, remember, it says the object of attachment has to be something polluted, contaminated. So, is the Buddha polluted? No. Buddha is totally beyond ignorance and all kinds of contamination. So Buddha is not a polluted object. So we can't really get attached to the Buddha. We could get attached to a statue of the Buddha. I think that can happen if you see a really beautiful statue, really well made, really precious materials. Yeah, you could get attached to that. So, but that's not the actual Buddha. If we're talking about the actual Buddha, the real Buddha, no. I mean, we can have aspiration, we can have faith. It's probably more like faith. The feelings we have towards the Buddha, seeing the Buddha's wonderful qualities and admiring his qualities, that would be faith, not attachment. And then if we want to become like the Buddha, want to emulate the Buddha, that's also one type of faith, wanting to emulate the good qualities of someone like the Buddha. But anyway, most of the time our attachment is not for Buddha or it's for ordinary things, samsaric things. Okay, so then it says, this is a general description of attachment. There are many degrees and variations of attachment. Some instances of attachment that arise in daily life are greed that wants more than our fair share, attachment to our ideas that leads to the stubborn insistence on being right, and that can lead to conflicts with other people. I think it should be done this way. No, you're wrong. Your way is wrong. My way is right. And so that can lead to painful interactions with others. Attachment to reputation, which can underlie a lot of our behavior. I want people to like me, to admire me, to have good thoughts about me, respect me. I want to be in a high position, receive a lot of, praise and so on. Praise, pleasing sensory experiences, and so on. So these are things that can happen in our daily life. We also become attached to people, which leads to having unrealistic expectations of them or of our relationships with them. This in turn leads to disappointment and friction in those relationships and feelings of bitterness or betrayal when the relationships don't continue as expected. So I think if we look at problems that arise in relationships and analyze what's going on there, we'll most probably find attachment, even though there may be anger and hurt and resentment and so on. But deeper down, if we dig deeper inside ourselves, we'll probably find there was attachment, because attachment leads to expectations. You should be like this, you shouldn't be like that, you should do this, you shouldn't do that. And then when the other person doesn't live up to our expectations, we feel hurt, we feel angry, and the relationship can fall apart. So, another question people often have is, what is the difference between attachment and love? Because the two can seem very similar. And I think realistically, when we are in relationships with other people, there's a mixture of both, a mixture of attachment and love. And they can be really mixed, almost inextricably. So it's good to know the difference between them so we can extract the attachment and leave the love. Love is a positive feeling, a beautiful feeling. We need to have it as part of our practice for enlightenment, but also to have healthy relationships. There does need to be love there. So we want to have more love, but without attachment. So some of the differences between love and attachment are, who are we more concerned about? If we're more concerned about ourselves, that's attachment. So attachment is usually about me. I want happiness. I want to feel good. I want you to do this and do that because it's pleasing to me. So we're more concerned about me than about the other person. Whereas love is focused on the other person and what's good for them, what will bring them happiness, what will benefit them. And I'm taking some of this from Geshe Rapton. There's a nice book by Geshe Rapton on mind and mental factors called The Mind and Its Functions. This is the best, for me, this is the best book about this topic. And so he says, he gives some other differences between attachment and love. One is attachment exaggerates, whereas love is more realistic. So with love, we don't need to exaggerate person's qualities. We just see them as they are. Whereas attachment has that quality of exaggerating and projecting and not seeing the person in a realistic way. Another difference is that attachment brings suffering and love brings happiness. Happiness and well-being. Okay? So if there is suffering in a relationship, it's probably because there's attachment. We may not have recognized the attachment before, but if we're suffering, then if we look carefully, where is that suffering coming from? We can probably notice attachment there. But it's hard. It's even if we want to have pure unconditional love without any attachment, that's very hard to do. That's quite a high ideal. It's something to work towards, but don't expect yourself to have it from the first moment. And actually having painful experiences is a way to recognize what is attachment and what is love. And then you can say, okay, I had attachment and now I can see how that brings suffering. So I want to work on decreasing that and increasing my love. So you can put your effort into doing that. Because remember, attachment isn't permanent, isn't a fixed permanent part of our mind. It's something that can be overcome. And another difference Geshe Rapton pointed out was attachment can turn into hatred. Okay, we've probably all had that experience. As long as the person does what you want and they please you and they make you happy, oh, they're wonderful, they're wonderful. But if they don't, I hate them. So that's attachment. And he said, love never turns into hatred. Real, genuine, unconditional love will never turn into hatred. Even if the person is mean to you or nasty to you, you can still love them. That's hard, of course. We have to work on that, but it is possible. So ideally, we just watch our mind, watch our experience, and try to recognize these two states of mind and understand attachment is afflicted, non-virtuous, leads to suffering, something I need to overcome, eliminate. But love is positive, virtuous, beneficial. I want to increase that. And there are methods for doing that. Okay, the next paragraph says, covetousness is a coarse form of attachment. As one of the 10 non-virtues, covetousness easily leads to actions that directly harm others, such as stealing or unwise sexual relationships. So among the list of the 10 non-virtuous actions, there's 3 of the mind, and one of those is covetousness. So that's when we want something belonging to another person. We see somebody's nice watch or shoes or jacket or computer or phone, and we want that. And that can lead us to, unhealthy ways of thinking and behavior, even stealing or unwise sexual relationships. So this is related to attachment. It's a very coarse form of attachment. So that can really lead to suffering if we're not careful. Other afflictions derived from attachment are miserliness that doesn't want to share our possessions, haughtiness that is attached to our good fortune, agitation that distracts the mind to desire objects during meditation. So we'll look at those later because those are included in the auxiliary afflictions. So just like I said, I wanted to include some antidotes to attachment if you feel, oh, what do I do about this? So just a few here. These are things I found really helpful. One is to compare the mind of attachment and the opposite state of mind, which is non attachment. Non attachment is one of the virtuous mental factors we looked at last time. So, non attachment isn't just an absence of attachment, because, there's certain things that we just don't have attachment to, certain types of food that we don't like, so we don't have attachment to those. So, non attachment isn't just that, there's an object we could be attached to, but we understand the faults of attachment and don't want to go there, don't want to let ourselves get caught up in attachment. So it's like the antidote to attachment. So if we compare these two states of mind and understand, how attachment leads to suffering, both in an immediate sense, if we watch our mind and we can see what happens when our mind does have attachment, it kind of goes crazy and uncontrolled, and we might find ourselves doing things and saying things that we might not normally do if we're in a good state of mind, and how it can lead to problems with other people, problems in relationships. So looking back on our past experiences, how we got ourselves into trouble because of attachment, or not just to people but also to things, how, where did that lead us, where did that get us? We try to recognize how it leads to suffering and problems, both in this life, but also, as the Buddha said, if we do have attachment and act out attachment, we're creating the cause for suffering in the future as well. It's one of the main things that keeps us stuck in samsara. So really get familiar with the faults of attachment. And then on the other hand, the benefits of non-attachment. That may be a little harder if we don't have much experience of non-attachment. But maybe for moments, there may be moments you might experience some non-attachment. Like if you're meditating and you're really enjoying your meditation, and even some nice smell comes along, somebody's baking bread, nice smell, but you think, no, I'm happy to just sit here and meditate, I don't need to go and have a piece of bread or whatever. So there may be moments when our mind is not afflicted by attachment, even though it could be, and just to see how kind of nice that is, not to have our mind just pulled here and there by all these different sensory objects. And impermanence in death, this is one of the most powerful antidotes. Things don't last. These pleasures, sense objects, and other kinds of pleasant experiences, they're momentary. They may last a few moments, a few minutes, maybe a few hours, but sooner or later they come to an end. They finish. They don't bring lasting, real, genuine satisfaction and happiness. And then death. I'm going to die one day and leave everything behind. All my relationships, all my money, my possessions, my body, all the things of this life are going to be left behind. Does it make sense to be attached to them? Want to be forever? Want to always be with these people and these things? It's impossible. And attachment can cause a lot of problems at the time of death. I don't want to let go. I don't want to leave behind. Then our mind is disturbed by attachment. That's not a good state of mind to have at the time of death. So that contemplation, I'm just mentioning it, but yeah, the meditation on death is very, very helpful, very powerful antidote to attachment. And then the third one is reflect on the unpleasant or faulty aspects of the object. Because attachment exaggerates, It sees a body over there and thinks, wow, as if it's like perfect, wonderful, fantastic. And it will be like that forever and ever and ever. Oh, wait a minute, that's just a body like mine. changes every moment. It, has smelly stuff inside and smelly stuff coming out, and it's getting older moment by moment. And it's going to turn wrinkled and gray, and you know, it's not perfect. It's not fully pleasurable and satisfying, or whatever. Just it's not that fantastic. Now, we don't want to go to the other extreme and develop aversion and hatred for it, for the object, but just to see it in a balanced way. Yeah, there's some good qualities, but it's not perfect. It has some faults as well. So have equanimity, an equanimous, even-minded attitude towards the object. That's healthier. So we will stop there.